I had a lady ask me years ago, she said, what is sin? And it caught me off guard because I didn't know exactly what to say, to be honest. It's not doing what God wants. Well, tell me exactly, and I don't know if she was trying to figure out if what she had done was a sin or not. But she wanted to know the answer to that. How do you picture sin? What comes to your mind when you think about that? Sin. Some will take that and they'll think to themselves, sin's an error, or sin is a mistake, or sin is poor judgment. And of course, all these things happen around sin, but sin is so much more than just these things that don't sound that bad. So much more, much more serious. You see, a good definition, I think, might be a deliberate violation of the will of God caused by human pride, self-centeredness, or disobedience. All of those three. And in the Bible, there is a disease that is often used as an illustration to us of what sin looks like. If we were to see sin as the Bible illustrates it for us with that, I do believe we would do whatever we could to get away from it and come to healing, to get away from that terrible power. Matthew 8 here is where we're at tonight. And Matthew 8 begins where chapter 4 actually left off, with the Sermon on the Mount as kind of this parenthesis that happens in between those. We've been going through the Gospel of Matthew. Well, at the end of chapter 4, this is what it says, that they all went all about Galilee, Jesus and his disciples, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of diseases of the kingdom. Then his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Cappadocia, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. And then in chapter 5, verse 1, it says Jesus went up on the mountain. And we've been up on the mountain for a long time, going over that Sermon on the Mount. But then in verse 1 here, it's going to tell us that he came down from the mountain after he preached that great sermon. And it's still going to say these great multitudes were following him. When he had come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Remember the old cartoon? I think it was on the Bugs Bunny Hour. You'd see that skunk, Pepe Le Pew, right? Pepe Le Pew would walk into a crowd, and what would happen? The crowd would part, right? We're talking about the Red Sea part, and Pepe Le Pew walked in. All the people ran away, right? Especially the little girl cat he thought was a skunk that he was always chasing after. Well, that's the kind of idea you might want to have in your mind when you hear about this man walking into this multitudes would have looked like. They'd all scattered to get out of the way. See, here we find a man among the multitude who must have cleared away the multitude for the moment because he had the dreaded disease of leprosy. And when I say leprosy, that probably doesn't disturb you too much. You probably don't know too much. You have ideas about it. You have things that you may think about it. But leprosy is a horrible disease. In a book called Unclean, Unclean, the author there described the horrors of leprosy, some of them. Listen to this. This disease, which we today call leprosy, generally begins with pain in certain areas of the body. Numbness follows. Soon the skin in such spots loses its original color. It gets to be thick, glossy, and scaly. As the sickness progresses, the thickened spots become dirty sores and ulcers due to poor blood supply. The skin, especially around the eyes and ears, begins to bunch up with deep furrows between the swellings, so that the face of the afflicted individual begins to resemble that of a lion. Fingers drop off or are absorbed back into the body. Toes are affected similarly. Eyebrows and eyelashes drop out. By the time one can see the person in this pitiful condition is a leper. By a touch of the finger, one can also feel it. One can even smell it. For the leper emits a very unpleasant odor. Moreover, in view of the fact that the disease-producing agent frequently also attacks the larynx, the leper's voice acquires a grating quality. His throat becomes hoarse, and you can now not only see, but feel and smell the leper as they draw close to you. But then you can also hear his rasping voice. And if you stay with him for some time, you can even imagine a peculiar taste in your mouth, probably due to the odor. Have you ever been around somebody and they stunk so bad that you got the taste of their stench in your mouth? Yeah, we have. Maybe you have. That's the kind of thing that comes on these people. It's a horrible, horrible disease. And to give the attitude that was shown to somebody who had leprosy during this time, one ancient rabbi, he said this: "When I see lepers, I throw stones at them lest they come near me." Another ancient rabbi said, "I would not so much as eat an egg that was purchased on a street where a leper had walked." So you want to talk about, people get all excited when they hear the word COVID anymore, right? Well, they really got excited in the ancient world when they heard the word leper. Leprosy today, though, is called another name, maybe because of the bad thought about leprosy. It's called Hansen's disease. Dr. Paul Brown, he's a world-renowned expert on the treatment of Hansen's disease, and he provided some help in understanding it. He says Hansen's disease is cruel, but not all the way other diseases are. It primarily acts as an anesthetic, numbing the pain cells of hands, feet, nose, ears, and eyes. It's not so bad, really, one might think. Most diseases are feared because of their pain. What makes a painless disease so horrible? Well, Hansen's disease numbing quality is precisely the reason such fabled destruction and decay of tissue occurs. See, for thousands of years, people thought that Hansen's disease caused the ulcers on the hands and the feet and the face, which eventually led to the rotting flesh and the loss of limbs on these people. You want to talk about the walking dead? That's a leper. Mainly, through Brand's research, he established that in 99% of the cases, it only numbs the extremities, means your fingers, your hands, and such things. And the destruction follows because the warning system of pain is gone. Now, how does that decay happen? In villages of Africa and Asia, a person with Hansen's disease has been known to reach directly into charcoal fire to reach a dropped potato. Nothing in his body told him not to do so. Patients at Brand's hospital in India would work all day gripping a shovel with a protruding nail in it, or extinguishing a burning wick with their bare hands, or walking on splintered glass. Watching them, Brand began getting a theory that this was chiefly anesthetic and only indirectly a destroyer of the flesh. On one occasion, he tried to open the door of a little storeroom. He tells this story. And it had a rusty padlock on it that wouldn't yield. Well, a patient, an undersized, malnourished little 10-year-old boy runs up, smiling. He says, "Let me try, doctor." And he offered and reached for the key. And with a quick jerk of his hand, he turned the key in the lock. Brand was like, how did he do that? He shouldn't have that kind of strength to be just a young boy to be able to do this. But upon examining the boy's fingers, Brand discovered that the act of turning the key had gashed a finger open to the bone, skin, fat, and joint were all exposed, yet the boy was completely unaware of it. To him, the sensation of cutting his finger to the bone was no different from picking up a stone or turning over a coin in his pocket. So the daily routines of life ground away at that person who has this disease, hands and feet, with no warning system. And if an ankle turned, tearing a tendon and a muscle, he'd just adjust and he'd walk along crooked along the way. If a rat chewed off a finger in the middle of the night, well, he wouldn't discover it missing until the morning. Stanley Stein, author of Alone No Longer, went blind because of a strange quirk of this Hansen's disease. You see, he would wake up each morning, wash his face off with a hot washcloth. But neither his hand nor his face was sensitive enough to tell him how hot the washcloth was. And he was using scalding water, and gradually he destroyed his eyes with his daily washing. This is horrible, isn't it? A horrible disease. Why am I explaining leprosy in such detail to you? Well, leprosy, the Bible tells us, is a graphic and clear illustration of what sin does to you. It's what sin does to people. People don't look at sin that way. They don't look at it in horror and danger and terror that you would even have such a thing. Lepers in ancient Israel were considered vivid object lessons of the effects of sin. Yet, even though this was a big picture of sin, a leper was the first one to be healed by Jesus in this series of miracles in Matthew. And I think there's a reason in that. You see, the fact that the leper came to him was astounding in itself because they were forbidden to come. They were supposed to holler out, "Unclean, unclean, nobody come near me." But this guy saw a little bit of hope, didn't he? A little bit of hope. We may not be able to relate to this story as a leper, but I think we can all relate to it as a sinner that needs Jesus and need a little bit of hope, right? We should see sin in this illustration. Think about it. Leprosy, like leprosy, sin infects the whole person. Every bit of you, body, soul, and spirit, doesn't it? It's ugly, sin is. Sin is ugly. The world makes it pretty. But you end up in a ditch somewhere, okay? And it looks pretty ugly. It's loathsome. It is corrupting. It destroys your body. And the more it takes a hold of you, the less you realize how bad it is. Your fingers and hands, right? It's contaminating. Sin just goes around amongst all of us, right? Start an angry fit sometime amongst a group and see how it turns out. It just goes from person to person, doesn't it? As it goes on, it's alienating. Somebody who has a sin in their life and they're constantly being bound and under the control of that sin, it pushes away family, it pushes away friends, it pushes away others, and pushes people away. And sin, just like leprosy, is incurable by man. Man doesn't have a cure for it, but God does. It causes us to hurt ourselves in terrible ways without even realizing it, right? How much sin have we done today and we don't even realize how destructive that was for us, right? Am I right? Yeah. It makes us, as this leper said he was, if you're willing, you can make me clean. It makes us unclean, doesn't it? You see, now let's look at some thoughts here on this leper, considering what he said. The leper came to Jesus. We have trusted in Christ. We are told to come boldly before the throne of grace. If you want to take care of the problem of sin in your life, what do you need to do? You need to go to Him, don't you? You can't just sit by and say, I ain't going up there. You can't just say, well, it'd be embarrassing to walk amongst the crowd. You can't just say, well, the rules tell me not to go down to that area. No, you've got to step out, right? And come to Him to receive the gift that you know He can give. The leper, when he comes, he knows who Jesus is. These other people may not, but he does. The leper was respectful to Jesus. It says he worshiped Him, saying, Lord, didn't he? He worshiped Him. You don't worship anybody but God. But this man, that's what he did, didn't he? He knew He was. He knew He was God. He come with respect. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to come with respect to God. A lot of people today have this idea of making fun of the things of God. I tell you what, I don't want to make fun of the things of God. We need to have reverence for the things of God because He's the only one that can heal us of our disease. And the leper here was humble. He didn't say, I command you, Jesus. you're going to do this, did he? He didn't say, I'm going to name it and I'm going to claim it, did he? He didn't say that. He said, if you're willing, he come with humbleness. And you can't come to Jesus without being humble. You have to be humble. Some say we shouldn't pray like that. Pray demanding a blessing, but that's not biblical, okay? And the leper had faith. He knew that if he was willing, you can make me clean, didn't he? This shows what the leper thought about Jesus. He had, from a distance, recognized his character just by near him. He realized that Jesus was compassionate. He realized that Jesus was God. He realized that he was a mighty king and able to heal him, right? I tell you what, there's a lot to be said right there in those first two verses, isn't there? Now let's look at one more. Verse 3. It says, then Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Now Jews here were forbidden by the Mosaic law to touch a leper because he was unclean. Of course, if you touch him, get near him, there's a danger involved, right? And to do so was to expose themselves both to ceremonial and physical contamination. See, they couldn't go into the temple for so long and all these different things. They could not help a leper by touching him, but only harm themselves. And some look at this and they say, well, Jesus broke the law. Jesus sinned. He touched that leper. No, he didn't. Jesus touched a healed man. He said, I am willing. It said, did you read exactly what it says there? It says Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. I can see him being cleansed right in their hands, right? Now, even though lepers were forbidden from touching or coming near, there's no doubt in my mind that the leper yearned for the touch of another human being. They learned for it. And they were never touched from the moment they got diagnosed. Can you imagine? Your father, or you come home, you're a father, you go in, you see your wife and kids, you're kind of from the outside, and you tell them, I've been diagnosed with leprosy. Leprosy. And the kids are crying. The wife, she's bawling because they know that he will never be near them again. He will never touch their face. He will never they're outside the city. He's going to starve to death. And so they have to come out there every day and go to work themselves, try to find some way to make money just so they can support their dad out here who has leprosy, who is slowly falling apart, his body and limbs falling off of him, right? What a horrible, horrible thing. And to think that Jesus, of all the ways he could have healed him, see, Jesus could have spoken a word and healed him, couldn't he? He could have just spoken a word. He could have just said the word. He could have just thought it. And he would have been healed. But he didn't do that. He chose to touch him. He chose to reach out and touch this man. And he was willing to touch the outcast. That says something about God, doesn't it? That says something about God. He's willing to touch those that no one else will touch. Right? Jesus as not being people. On January the 3rd, 1865, in the Kingdom of Hawaii, then a sovereign state, it wasn't part of the United States, there was an act enabled called an Act to Prevent the Spread of Leprosy. And any person suspected of having that ancient disease would be inspected, deemed incurable, permanently exiled to a peninsula on the island of Molokai. More than 8,000 people with leprosy were permanently segregated over the next century to this island, just going there to die. Native Hawaiians began calling leprosy the sickness that separates family. This place was separated by steep cliffs, treacherous oceans, and the peninsula served as kind of a natural prison, and it soon gained a reputation as a death sentence if you're sent there. They talk about Alcatraz back in the day and going to that prison. That's where you go to die. Only one man was actually willing to move to Molokai. Willingly. A man named Father Damien. He was born in Belgium. He came to Hawaii as a young missionary, spent the last 16 years of his life voluntarily living in a leprosy colony before contracting the disease himself and dying in 1889. He originally landed there in 1873, and he wrote a letter to his brother that said he would make himself a leper with lepers to gain all to Christ. To gain all to Christ. Are you willing to go to the untouchables to gain all to Christ? Do we have the evangelism desire to go even to the touchables to gain all to Christ? Are we willing to go to those living in filth and poverty? I remember going into an old trailer when I was down at the other church years ago. I went in, and it was after church. They asked us to come down and talk to these people. They were living in just a little trailer. It was so close together. A man, a woman, 2 or 3 kids. I don't even see how they all fit inside the thing. But I went down there and tried to share the gospel with them. Are we willing to go to places like that? Are we willing to talk to crooks and even the untrusted? I don't know how many people I've seen come in to churches over the years, and they're just crooks. They're just coming by. They'll go from one church to another, right? And here's my hope, okay? Here's my hope. That as they go from one church to another, they'll actually listen. I don't care if they take 10 or 20 bucks, but let them hear Jesus, right? Let's be willing to touch somebody who makes us sick that they'd steal from a church. Because Jesus would, wouldn't he? Jesus would. What deep in sexual immorality? Would you be willing to sit down with them and share about the Lord? Would you be willing to give them a cup of cold water in Jesus' name? What about those dying of AIDS or other diseases? I remember a story not too long ago. The head man down in Newport over the missions organization down there, he told how he had contracted disease because he decided to go into a hospital ward with his 2 kids, and they contracted this malaria while they were there. But they felt the Lord would have them go in there to minister to those people. I tell you, we got to never forget that Jesus is a lot of things. But one thing he certainly is compassionate, right? God is love. That's just not some vague word. That's his compassion. God is love. So here we see Jesus touched the man, healed him, and there was so much meaning in that. But then Jesus gives this unusual request. He says, and Jesus said to him here after this is done, "See that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Now, under the law of Moses, your priest was basically your physician too. And when a leper was cleansed, he was obligated to bring an offering and to appear before the priest in order to be pronounced clean. And this is a weird process, okay? It's in Leviticus 14. It involves taking 2 birds, killing one of them over running water. Then the live bird, along with cedar wood, a scarlet string, and some hyssop, was then dipped in the blood of the slain bird. The former leper was then sprinkled 7 times and pronounced clean by the priest, and the live bird was set free. That's weird, isn't it? That's weird. Well, the cleansed person was then to go wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, bathe himself, and he could then rejoin the rest of society, although he had to remain outside the tent for at least 7 days beforehand. And the final act on the 8th day was to bring the required guilt, sin, and grain offerings according to what could be afforded, and to be anointed by the priest on various parts of his body. That's a lot of weird rituals. And we wonder, why is that? And it would seem like this is a whole lot of weird stuff. And then we went through COVID a few years ago, didn't we? And we realized what it looked like to keep somebody out of the tent for 7 days. And we realized how important it was to check everybody over real well before they come in, right? And we realized how important it was to keep everything covered up. And we realized all those things then that we may not have realized before. And quarantine didn't sound so crazy as it used to, right? The things they were doing, they didn't even know about germs and all that, but God did, right? But there's something deeper in the ritual. Remember that crazy stuff I talked about, a bird? 2 birds. They slay a bird. Then they take it and they wash it and they throw blood all over it and they let one go free. What does all that mean? Well, that's a picture. That's a picture of the leper's freedom and a reminder that something must die to attain it. Right? Is that not a picture of what Jesus done for us? Weren't they seeing that? And this bird getting killed and you getting washed in the blood and being sent off and being free and then go out the window and fly away. God has a purpose in everything, even when it sounds kind of weird, all right? There's a reason. That sounds a whole lot like our salvation, doesn't it? One last question that kind of throws me off here. Why did Jesus tell him not to tell anyone? Because if this happened, it seemed like you'd want to tell everybody about it, right? Another gospel actually tells us that he did go tell everybody, even though Jesus told him not to. In Mark 1:45, it says he went out and he began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. So Mark tells us here that this caused Jesus not to be able to move as freely to proclaim his message. So that's why he didn't want to tell him. So when God tells you to do something, there's a reason in it, right? One other thing. Jesus did tell him to tell someone, though, didn't he? Who was that? The priest. The religious leaders. It was no doubt a rare event for a leper to be healed. It was so extraordinary. In fact, it should have alerted that priest to the idea that the Messiah was here. Right? Once the priest heard that, he should have come and worship Jesus like the leper did. But we don't hear of any reaction of that happening, do we? The Messiah came to Israel, and they weren't even looking for the Messiah. They didn't even know their sins were as bad as they were. They were more like the walking dead than the leper was. Okay? They were more like that. They couldn't see. The one person that should have been looking for the Messiah in that community and recognized the spiritual leprosy of his people didn't see it. Here we are sitting in church tonight. Do you recognize the spiritual leprosy here all across the United States of America? And does it concern you? Do you see the state around you today? Do you see the sin as a dangerous, destructive disease? Or are you just living your life ignoring it? The cause of trouble, the root of all sorrow, the dread of every man is in that one little word, sin. We all have that terminal disease, and it's far worse than COVID or even cancer. It has crippled the nature of man and caused man to be caught up in the devil's trap. People don't willingly expose themselves to COVID today, do they? Not willingly. People generally run from it when they hear about it. And that's what we should do with sin too. Flee. Flee. I hope you're enjoying the sermons here and have subscribed to my channel on YouTube. But I would love even more to meet with you in person at the church where I'm blessed to pastor at in White Pine, Tennessee, Omega Baptist Church.